Okay, before we get started, team, would you introduce yourselves to Arthur?
Okay, I'll start. Hello, Arthur. I'm Therese Johnson, and we are very excited to have you speak to us today. Joyce has told us some very exciting things, and I received a copy of the book, and thank you for autographing it. That was a big surprise. That was very nice.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So, um, does he need to know anything about me? I'm retired school teacher, administrator, that kind of stuff in Chicago. I live in Chicago. Well, I live in the suburbs of Chicago.
Next.
Hello, Arthur, welcome. My name is Cynthia Broughton. I'm also a retired educator. Actually, I was the interim deputy regional superintendent for the schools outside of suburban Cook County, 147 school districts. And I took early retirement 10 years ago, and I am just so excited about being able to talk to you because there are some things from the educational perspective that I really want to talk to you about.
Cynthia read the whole book.
Thank you.
I loved it.
He's always an overachiever that outdoing all of us.
No, I'm not.
Okay, next.
Hi, Arthur. I'm Roberta Brown, and it is such a pleasure to meet you. And I'm surprised that you're as young as you are. I was thinking that you'd be much older with all the wisdom that was imparted in your novel. It's wonderful. So thank you for being here with us.
Thank you.
Betty, that leaves you.
Yes. Hi, Arthur. This is Betty Sanderfer. And like everyone else, I've looked forward to this occasion. We usually meet among ourselves discussing books, but to have an actual author to give his perspective of his work is very exciting. And like everyone else, I'm a retired, well, not everyone, but most of us are retired educators, and just look forward to hearing your perspective on your book.
Thank you.
Okay, and I'm going to give Arthur an introduction. Let me say he is my cousin, so I'm a little biased, but he is also a professor of criminal justice at Kutztown University. Am I pronouncing that right? Kutztown University.
Kutztown University.
Specializing in criminal justice history, race and policing, constitutional history, legal history, and criminal justice policymaking. He received his BA in political sciences, Kutztown University in 1990, his MS in criminal justice from Westchester University in 1995, and his doctorate in law and policy from Northeastern University in 2011. Chained to the System 2020 was published by Cognella Press, and it's Dr. Garrison's third book. His first book, Supreme Court Jurisprudence in Times of National Crisis, Terrorism and War, A Historical Perspective, was published in 2011. His second book, Race and Criminal Justice Policy, Rhetoric, Politics, and Policy, was published in 2019. And now, Arthur, you got the floor.
Hello, ladies, and the honor is mine, of course, in coming before you and talking about my book. So I'm glad all of you got copies, and later on, please let me know after you've had a chance to fully digest it what you think. I'm always looking to hear ideas and comments, and I'm looking forward to your ideas. So I approach my book looking at criminal justice as a historical matter. I teach a history of criminal justice here at Kutztown, and what I try and instill into my students that the criminal justice system just didn't show up out of nowhere. It is a result of policy, which brings to our first point. To understand criminal justice, you have to understand the politics and the policies of America writ large before getting into the specific policy of criminal justice. Now, criminal justice, like all policy, reflects concepts of right and wrong. So let me start with going this way. Rhetoric produces narratives. Narratives are debated and settled in politics. Politics produces policy. So going back, your concept of right and wrong, what should and should not be, okay? That is translated into rhetoric. When you enunciate why something should be A and not B, why something is right and why something is wrong, what is and is not criminal, okay? That's rhetoric. The story around your ideas of what should and should not be, the oughts of the world, that's narrative, okay? Now, that in the political realm is what politics is for. Politics decides whose narrative prevails. That's why every 2, 4, 6 years elections matter, right? Trump had one narrative, Biden had a different narrative. Clinton had one narrative, Trump had another narrative. And on November 4th, people choose between those two narratives. That's how things are done. Now, the winner makes policy out of what happened in November, which is politics, right? The two narratives fight it out. The winning narrative is the one that wins the political day. Okay, that's politics. My view over your view. Now, I win, I make policy. You lose, you go home and write memoirs. Okay? Now, I show up in my office and I say the policy of America shall be A, not B, right? If my opponent wins, the policy is D and not F. So, criminal justice is like all other policy. It is the result of rhetoric, narrative, politics into policy. That is how our criminal justice system got here. Now, to understand that as far as the particular topic that I'd go into my book is the history of criminal justice and race thereof, we have to back up to see when the story begins. And the story begins 1619. Okay? All right then. Now, that's when we begin to come into the story. Right. Now, 1607, the first colonies show up and they are business oriented. Okay, they nearly starved to death. Okay, all right then. Then tobacco is introduced to the Virginia colony and money falls out the sky. They are saved. Now, here is the problem. To pull tobacco out of the ground requires large plantations. That explains the Southern aristocracy being land ownership oriented in the Virginias and the Georgias and later the Texases and in South Carolinas and the South, right? Okay. To pull tobacco out of the ground and then rice out of the ground and then cotton out of the ground, you need large plantations. All right then. Now, so here's the problem when tobacco first shows up in Virginia. It works. The problem is you need a whole lot of people to stand in the hot sun to pull stuff out of the ground and to put stuff in the ground and to cultivate it. Okay, then. The white colonists weren't having it. All right, then. So that's where we come in. And one of the first things in understanding American history, culturally, not factually, because factually everybody agrees that slaves came to the United States. That's not where the debate is. The debate is culturally and what that means. Okay? When Blacks came into the United States, first into the colonies, first from Angola, then from Western Africa and the whole slave story, right? We can get into details of that a little later. They came for a purpose. The purpose wasn't theirs. And that's one of the things that separates our history from everybody else's history. Our purpose, as far as whites were concerned, was that we came to serve them. Okay? Now, indentured servitude, poor whites that didn't have 2 nickels to rub together coming to the United States have a slightly different story. Now, they came and they're at the bottom of the food chain, don't get me wrong, but they came on a different deal. They came and said, okay, they said in England, look, you pay my way to come to the colonies. I will work for you for 7 years. At the end of 7 years, I get up and leave. I am your servant for 7 years. Okay. All right then. So they come over and they were getting the short end of the stick. I mean, they were really worked, but the point was they were not slaves. So I come over an indentured servant. Okay, then I find somebody and get married. The person I'm an indentured servant to does not own my wife by definition because I married her. If I have children, they're free by definition and by law. The person who I'm indentured servitude to, he can't rape my wife because he feels like it. Okay. I am his servant for 7 years. Now, if I run away, they add years to my service because it was illegal for me to run away. All right, then. Blacks are a whole other story. Blacks come and they start as property on the same level as horses, mules, and cows. We serve whites as a purpose. Now, hold that thought and come to a different thought. How does a country, how does a set of colonies, Virginia, and then in 1620, Plymouth shows up, and you have the Puritans, a different kind of people coming in. They were coming in for religious freedom and so on and so forth. All right. While the Virginia colony was about money. Okay, then the two come together and you form the South and New England seaboard. All right. When they came over and got into slavery, they had a problem to solve because Christians can't own slaves. And they had to figure out a way around that. Okay. Christians can't own slaves. Okay. All right. So first they said, all right, look, these people are not human, and that's how we can get away with it. All right. By 1620, 1630, that theory wasn't working. The bottom line is they had to admit that the Africans they were bringing over were human. Now, if you're a Christian, that produces a problem, because if you are human, you have a soul to save, and that's what Christians are for, right? As far as their rhetoric and their evangelism. So now they were stuck with a real problem. So here's how they solved it. They said, yes, they are human. Yes, they have souls that can be saved. Yes, they can be Christianized and baptized. But that doesn't change their status between whites and blacks. Now, for them to make that make sense biblically, you have to back up to the story of Noah. Okay? So world is not doing well. Lord says enough of this. Flood, Noah, three sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Okay? All right. Shem produces the Jewish line. Japheth produces the white Caucasian line. And Ham, all the people of color. All right, then. So now you know the story, right? Noah, the flood is over. Noah gets drunk, passed out, flat drunk, right? Okay. The story goes that Ham looked at his father's nakedness. All right. Japheth and Shem heard that Noah was out cold drunk, got a towel, got a blanket, backed up, and put the blanket over Noah to protect him, and that his nakedness is not exposed. All right, then. Noah wakes up and curses Ham's son, curses his son, Canaan. All right, then. Also in the scripture, it is said that the Lord had chosen to give the children of Abraham the land of Canaan. All right, then. So come back up now to us. Okay, so now they said, well, there it is. God has chosen between the three sons. Shem first, Japheth, then Ham. Well, now who are the children of Ham? Black people. And the theory is that Noah said the children of Canaan will serve the other two brothers. And that was the Christian link that they used. Blacks were supposed to serve whites. So it is in their nature and their place under God for them to serve them. Okay, so now that's how they got around the problem. And that's where white supremacy was able to be upheld in the same breath with Christianity, a plague that has been in their thinking ever since. Okay? Black people are the children of Ham. They're supposed to be under Japheth, and Japheth is whites. All right. So now they solve their problem. Now they solve their problem. Blacks can be Christianized, they can be saved, but they are still lower than we are, and God said so. All right, then. So that's how white supremacy and Christianity found roots. All right. So now how does the criminal justice system come in? So I explained to my students that policing is birthed out of slave patrols. That's where policing history in the United States first begins. All right. Now, the purpose of the slave patrols was very simple. They were to put down slave rebellions. They were to prevent slave rebellions, catch runaway slaves. Period. So now understand what that genesis means, because this is a genesis that African Americans hold on to that whites don't fully grasp. At least conservative ones don't grasp. Okay, right? Side story, let me come back to that side thing. I explained to my students that African Americans and whites tend to see the criminal justice system differently, and that is universal in all the polls, because Blacks see the criminal justice system historically from 1619 to present. We see an incident where a police officer shoots or does something against an African American, and we see 1619 all the way. It's a whole story, okay? Whites see it contemporaneously. This time, this cop, this person.
Arthur,
Yes.
I'm sorry. We have one other person that's trying to get in, and you have to let them in.
Oh, I have to now. Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on a moment.
Mhm.
There we go.
Thank you.
Okay. Hello. Okay, so whites tend to see criminal justice and incidents contemporaneously, moment in time. We tend to see things historically. That's why it is a lot of times Blacks and whites don't see the criminal justice system the same way, because we're at a different vantage point. All right, but coming back around. All right, so now we got the slave patrols. So the slave patrols, their job by design was to keep Blacks in their place. In theory, they were never designed to protect Black rights. And that has been something that flows through our history ever since. All right, now, okay, so colonial era ends, the constitutional era begins. Okay, then, now you have the dichotomy between North and South. Okay. Blacks run north, right? Okay, when they get to the north, Philadelphia, New York's, Connecticut's, they feel safe. But here's the problem waiting for them. The South is demanding that the North return their property. Now, let's be honest now. We were property. So when I up and run, I am actually stealing property. So I'm in New York now in possession of property that belongs to somebody else. The South demands the North to return them, not keep them. Because the North, by the time the Constitution is written a few years thereafter, slavery falls out of the North because the North is industrial. The South, slavery is drilled down into the ground because they're agrarian. All right. So the South now is telling the North, you need to give up these people. So what develops in the North as far as policing is concerned, as far as Blacks are concerned? Slave catchers. And so the police in the North will catch runaway slaves and on their own dime, send them back to the South. A cottage industry shows up of slave catchers. So even if a Black man gets up to the North, they're afraid of every white person they see because they could be captured and sent back as runaway slaves, or if they're free Blacks altogether, what difference does it make? And so they could be grabbed and kidnapped and sent back south. And if you're sent back down to Georgia somewhere, who are you going to complain to saying, you got the wrong guy, I'm a free Black, right? Okay, so law enforcement develops a historical historical fact that as far as Blacks are concerned, policing has never been about protecting us. And that's where that rhetoric comes from when you hear the young kids talking about it today, right? Because they have a grasp of this history. If you take slave patrols and slave catchers, the origins of policing before it became professionalized, you put that together, they were never designed by beginning to be interested in us. All right. So in my book, I explain why that matters. What are the other things that I explain in my book? And then I'll stop. One of the things I explain in my book is I try to answer the question of why crime is concentrated and why crime is concentrated in certain neighborhoods. When you hear that there's crime in a city, it's not equally distributed across the entire city. We all know that, right? Crime is locked in certain neighborhoods and certain blocks. Okay, why is that true? Okay, so let's start with the Federal Housing Act of 1934, which I talk about in the book. Okay, that is right. So the Depression hits. Okay, the federal government comes with this bright idea. It's going to backstop and back up secondary mortgages. Now, doesn't that sound familiar? But anyway, they're going to backstop secondary mortgages. And so if the person defaults, the government will pay the bank. This is a way to shore up mortgages and to prevent foreclosures in a depression. All right, no problem so far. All right. So the government comes up with a bright idea. Now, before we figure out who we're going to back up, we have to value any particular neighborhood. Now, here it comes. Behold, redlining. Okay? And redlining, they would sit there and actually take a red pen. That's why it's called redlining, and code out certain neighborhoods. So, you had, let me see here. Let me pull this up. Right. Red was classified as hazardous, underdeveloped, low value. Yellow was declining, but had some value. Blue was stable, and green was most valuable. All right. Still, so far, not bad. Here it is. Only Black neighborhoods ended up red. If a neighborhood had more than 5% Blacks in it, it was coded red. Now, here's the problem. If it's coded red, the federal government did not put any money into it and did not backstop any of the loans. That meant that this neighborhood was now economically roped off from all of the New Deal. Okay. Then, to add to that, they would push out through block busting whites from red areas. Now, block busting was, you're white, you live in this neighborhood. Okay. The capitalists of the world says, you know what, we can make money off of this, but these people have to go. All right. How do you make white people run when they own a house? You tell them Black people are showing up, because everybody knows if Black people move into your neighborhood, the value of the house goes straight down. All right, then. So block busting, they would come in and they would tell white people, you know what? Black people are going to move into the neighborhood. They actually might move one into the outskirt of the neighborhood. Or as I saw in one story, they would hire Black women to get a baby carriage and walk up and down areas. White people would see it, freak, and then these people would come in and say, you know what? We'll give you 80 cents on the dollar for your house. Or you can stay here and let your house value crash and burn. All right, then. White people take 80 cents on the dollar and leave. Now, the person has this house, 80 cents on the dollar. Now, the house is actually worth $1, but he paid 80 cents for it. Okay? All right, then. Now, Black people come in, and this is where contract selling comes in. Black people would come in, and they would contract to live in the house, not buy the house. They would contract to live in the house, thinking it was equivalent to a mortgage. Now, of course, now they would charge the equivalent of 90 cents on a dollar as far as the mortgage. So they're already 10 cents up, right? Blacks are now 10 cents down, and they don't even own it, but they think they do. All right, they miss a payment, they get foreclosed, and whatever they put in is now lost. This is why certain neighborhoods are low valued historically, because of this kind of story. Then racial covenants come in, And so now you got the suburbs, all white suburbs. The only way a white person could stay there is if they agreed never to sell it to a black. And that could go for generations down the line. Right? Okay. Then comes the National Housing Act of 1949. Right? Okay. That is where the idea of urban renewal comes in. So the federal government now gives the states and the cities eminent domain where they can just go in and take property, hand you a check, and be done with it. The idea is that you would break down dilapidated housing from the late 1980s, very early 1900s, knock them down and put more expensive housing on. All right, in theory, not a problem. We want to improve. But what they did is the urban renewals were only black neighborhoods. And what they did is they dispersed blacks to more redlined areas to make less redlined areas and move them up to yellow or green. And so that is also an explanation of where the concentration comes in. The last explanation of the concentration occurs with the first and second Great Migrations. Right? The first one, the early 1900s, 1910, 1912, 1915, right? And the second one starting around 1940. Make long story short, those two together, but with the Jim Crow concepts of redlining, blockbusting, contract selling, and racial covenants, trapped blacks into certain parts of the city. That's where that concentration comes from. Then politically, socially, and economically, they were separated from the rest of the city, growing economically, socially, and politically. Last thing I talk about in the book, and then I will stop. The thing is that neighborhoods that are concentrated and locked away from everybody else, poverty has a personality and a sociology to itself. And the worst of human nature gets expanded and concentrated when only the negatives are locked into that community. And so things that are bad over time are seen as positive. And that's where that problem of, hold on a second, gangsters is not authentically black. Crack selling is not authentically black. Prostitution is not authentically black. All right. So where did all this rap music come from? Right? Where did that come from that you are a true black man if you've been in prison? No. How did that happen? Okay. That happened because of that concentration and the whole story of the 70s when black flight chased white flight. That's a whole other conversation because the 1968 Civil Rights Act for housing actually worked. It allowed black people to make a run for it. So middle-class, educated blacks made a run for it, chasing whites who were making a run for it. Whites ran into the suburbs. Blacks ran into the outer part of the city. What was left was a concentration in the inner city of blacks who could not run for various reasons. And then the worst of human nature got concentrated, locked in, and 2 generations later, you got rap music coming out saying you're not an authentic black man unless you've been in prison. Now, how did that moral concept happen? That happened because of certain policies dating back to the 1920s. Somebody just didn't wake up one morning and decide that you're a black man if you've been in prison. That is not how it happened. So anyway, let me stop there. My book goes into how that history works. I go into the history of crime control policy in the 1980s and 90s. I talk about Reagan, Bush, Clinton, and how Clinton got away with all sorts of sins. And then Bush. I also talk about Nixon and the war on drugs and how that with Reagan explains how blacks at one time made up 50% of the total prison population when we only make up 13% of the total United States population, and how it was 50% for about 6 years. And then it was in the upper and middle 40s for another 10 years. And it only dropped under Obama, dropped to 33, where it sits now. But let me stop there. And then we can talk and I can answer questions. Thank you very much.
Wow. That is a lot of fantastic information. Why don't we have some questions?
Mm-hmm.
Seeing you're smiling.
You know, this is the first book that I highlighted almost the whole book. I'm trying to find which highlight I want to talk. Usually I have a highlighted part and I want to go to that part, but I have so many highlights. Well, first let me just say this. I want to thank you for writing this book. The title is most appropriate because we are chained to the system. And I want to thank you for giving us your time because I know that's valuable too. But I couldn't help but, as I read this, think about how it is so important for truth to be told. And that's what you do in this book. That's what I love. You tell the truth and you break it down and you give the facts and nothing but the facts. Right now, it seems that we have a truth-telling crisis here in America. And in addition to, that attributes to the race crisis, in addition to the mental health crisis, all of these crises that we have. But I was wondering if, just reflecting on what's going on today, we had the Rodney King, we had the Eric Garner, where we had videotapes of policemen committing crimes against Blacks. And so when George Floyd came along, white people acted like this, the first video they ever saw of a policeman attacking a Black person. It's, to me, and I've been watching this whole trial, this seems like the first time for me, and maybe one of the few times ever, that we actually have policemen breaking the code of silence that they've had and testifying against their own. Should we take this as some sort of sign that possibly there's a change coming? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Here's the thing I think with policing on one level. The generation of police chiefs and police captains now are different than the ones that we grew up with in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. These officers believe, I think this new crop of police chiefs and captains believe in the guardian model, not the warrior model. The warrior model is the reason crime exists is because the police are not respected and not feared. And crime is the result of people who are criminal not being put on a leash. And the warriors are there to do just that. Okay. That is the theory that took hold in the 1950s, especially with Chief Baker in California. Okay. And of course, the FBI director, Hoover. All right. The Guardian model says the point is to prevent crime from happening, not go chase down the criminal after it happened. The goal of the Guardian model is to protect society as well as to work with society to make things safer. But they are not enforcers, they are protectors. Warrior model, they are enforcers. All right. I think the new generation of captains and chiefs are guardian model. So on one level, I see improvement. This trial, I would not put a whole lot in this trial one way or the other, because here's the thing. I was explaining to my students yesterday what this trial is. Realize this: if the defense can convince 1 to 12 that the reason Floyd died, stopped breathing, is because of a heart attack attached to drug use, just assume that he convinces them that. Chauvin goes home because Chauvin's done nothing. Okay? If they believe that, Chauvin's guilty of assault. Okay? Maybe aggravated assault if you really work at it, and I doubt aggravated assault. Simple assault is probably what you could make. Okay? All right. That's what this trial is going to come down to. The defense is basically arguing. They have some side arguments going on about training and all the rest of that, and I don't think they really believe that one. The real battle, if you're watching this trial, the real battle is when the state puts on the coroner and the expert witness on expert medical testimony versus what the defense puts on. Because I think because look at it this way. It's not like they can argue. It's not like the defense attorney can argue, my boy didn't have his knee on his neck. The video is there. So it's not like he can say, my boy ain't do it, right? A defense attorney, when he's in trial, if you strip all the cute stuff down to the raw basics, a defense attorney walks into court with one or a combination of three things. My guy didn't do it. Somebody else did it. The prosecution can't prove my guy did it. Okay? When you strip all of it down, a defense attorney's walking into court with one of those three or a combination of those three. Chauvin's attorney is saying, look, he did not die by a knee to the neck, and that's what stopped him from breathing. He died because he was a drug addict and his heart gave out. Now, in the court of public opinion, that's ridiculous. All right, granted. But in trial, that's the whole point, because the prosecution has to prove a causal link between knee to neck and him dead, right? He has to prove that causal link, right? Okay. He also has to prove that what he did was reckless because he's being charged with manslaughter, not murder. So it's not an intentional crime, right? So the mens rea is recklessness, right? So he has to prove reckless or negligent, right? That gets him there. Okay, the knee on the neck is the act. All right, the causation is why he died. Okay, the defense is arguing, yes, he's dead. Yeah, my man had his knee on his neck, but that's because police training allows him to do that. And he kind of played with that. I don't think he really believes that's going to work, but he's tossing that in just in case. The real thing is, even if my guy used force he shouldn't have used, if the force didn't stop Floyd's heart from beating, you have to come back not guilty because you have no causation. That's what he's going for. Okay, because that's what this case is really about, I'm not putting any social strength to it. Now, with that said, people outside don't know all of that, okay? They think the video is the whole story. So they're like saying, what's the problem, right? So you go to MSNBC, CNN, and Fox, none of them are explaining this the way this case actually is as a legal matter. They're still looking at it as a political matter. Now, here's one of the things I found that was interesting. MSNBC and CNN are showing the trial gavel to gavel, right? Court TV, obviously. Fox, they're talking about immigration down at the border. They're not showing the trial. If you look at the commentary parts of the three channels, MSNBC, CNN, they're talking about this case or COVID. Fox is talking about the border. That's where our politics is, okay? We're past even arguing over the same facts. We're past, we've devolved past that, right? Now, everybody watches what they want to watch to be reinforced to what they believe. And so now you have talking right past one each other. So that's a whole other problem. So that's my long answer to say, if they find him guilty, the prosecutor proved his causation. If they don't find him guilty, these attorneys are in the same breath as Cochran, F. Lee Bailey, and pulling something off. Like, really? Seriously? But pulling something off, right? But I'm not looking at this case for great social commentary. The real thing that I think I hope gets passed is the Floyd Justice Act, which changes civil liability in suing police officers. I think that will go a long way in making some improvements, because I think police officers, and I support policing, don't get me wrong, but I think with the immunity, the way it works, it's not immunity, it translates into impunity. And that's the problem. But anyway, I hope that came close to answering your question.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I have more, but I'll give other people a chance. If you get back to me, fine, I'm ready.
So I think, Arthur, what you said in terms of the argument, the causation, and I was sharing with the group earlier, we had a case in law school about Mrs. Paul's graft head.
Oh, the great Paul's Graph case.
Right.
Yes.
You take the victim like you find them.
Mm-hmm.
And that means even if he did have a situation that may or may not be weakened because he was on drugs, but for that knee you put on his neck, that situation would not have came to rise, you know, because it wasn't like he was going to have a heart attack that day. Your knee caused him to react to whatever else was going on with him. So
True, but remember the other part of causation, right? You have the but-for analysis,
right.
and then you have proximate cause. Proximate cause is foreseeability. And so if they can't prove the foreseeability, they still lose causation.
Okay, so, but then again, you have the foreseeability. If I put my knee on your neck and your back for 9 years, for 9
9 minutes and 29 seconds.
Yeah.
Yes.
9 seconds, it is foreseeable that I'm going to stop your breath and you're going to die. Now that, you know, actions those actions can predict death. I'm cutting out your airway.
That definitely is what the prosecutor is going to try and argue. That is in part why they are arguing. Well, hold on a second. Did you notice in one of the questions he asked the police expert watching the video, is it fair to say that my client had his knee on his back in this one moment in time? The witness says yes. What's he trying to imply? Okay. He's trying to imply, hold on a second. I grant you that he was there, but not for all 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Let's look at that. The defense is going to parse out that video to death. And it's going to say, no, hold on a second. Yeah, he had his knee then, but he kind of moved it off of his neck and onto his shoulder. By the way, where was his knee on his neck? Because there's a difference between the back of your neck and the front of your neck where your air pipe is.
Okay. So
right?
this is,
So that's what I expect.
Yeah.
That's where the real issue in this case is going to be. It's going to be that specific. And the prosecution has to prove he stopped breathing because of the knee to his neck, not anything else. If one person on that jury believes he died any other way, or if one juror is not beyond a reasonable doubt sure, they can hang up the whole jury.
okay. I mean, it's thank you, Cynthia, for watching it for all of us.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the point that they're pushing now, that he moved and it was from his angle, it was on his shoulder, not on his neck, and you know, crazy.
But I still got you on the ground and you're still yelling, you can't breathe. Okay. So Cynthia, what was the other question you had? Anybody else?
Anybody else have anything?
Therese, Roberta, Betty?
I mean, like Cynthia, I wasn't trying to look at this book as a textbook, but I started off in the preface with my highlighter. And the thing that concerns me, we keep hearing that with Black Lives Matter and so much depending on the outcome of the trial, the fact that Minnesota, you know, basically almost, well, in one section burned down, and you've got situations across the country and across the world where everything it's like a fire that's ready to ignite, and you know the sparks are everywhere. And you know, you started off the book saying that of all the slave-owning nations of Western European tradition, only the United States required a war to end the practice of slavery. You know, and we keep, you know, talking about a race war. Is it inevitable? And, you know, it's so frightening to think that there's so much that is being put on this trial because it's got such wide appeal, at least to those of us. We know that, you know, the Republicans don't care about the trial. You know, they're trying to throw fire somewhere else with the border, and you know how we're letting all these illegals in, and you know, anything but the real truth. So, you know, my question is, are we really on the verge of a civil war, blacks against whites? Because we've been going through all of these changes, and people, you know, the younger people especially, are tired. They're not seeing the results. You know, we've been waiting. You know, we thought with the civil rights movement, you know, we were getting the Voting Rights Act, you know, approved. We were getting the right to vote. We were making progress. But here we are 150 years later, and we're still talking about the same things. You know, we say that the criminal justice system, you know, we know it's not broken. It's working the way the white people designed it to work, but it's not working for us. And if we see what I believe will be a total miscarriage of justice by Floyd being his killer let go on technicalities, I just see that as just being more fuel that's going to be added to the fire. And what do we do?
You know, I don't think the demarcation line is black and white. I think the demarcation line is generational. Because if you look at the reaction to Floyd, young whites, young blacks understood it the same way. What you had was what the people that, and then the people that, let me back up. Let me put it this way. When that video came out, because one of the things I do is I listen to conservative talk radio, and I watch Fox as much as I can handle, because in part I want to understand, because I think the reason that everybody freaked when Hillary Clinton lost is that they never watched Fox or listened to conservative talk radio. So they had no idea there was a different narrative out there. And so when Hillary lost, the people were getting therapy dogs, for Pete's sakes. And the reason is because they had no idea there was a different narrative. And so I think that's why I listen to the other one. Also, when I'm teaching my class, I want my students to realize that if you want truth, at minimum, you have to listen to all three, and maybe you might bump into truth somewhere, right? If you just listen to one, you're not getting truth. You're getting a specific bias. Now, I think what happened when Floyd happened is that everybody agreed this was over the line. And what happened, what I think is happening is that young blacks, young whites, other people of color, a certain generation, the Generation Zs and the millennials, right? What they don't have is the race issue in their heads the way we did and our parents did. It's not in their heads the way it was. But the people still who vote more consistently, they're of our generation and our parents' generation. And whites in that group, if you look at the polling, okay, are Republicans and Trump voters. Now, it's a whole other conversation to get into the Trump base and why white evangelical Christians and white social conservative Christians bonded to Trump when Trump didn't believe any of their theories when he was coming up. That's a whole other book conversation. There's a whole other book conversation. But the millennials and Generation X are not there. So what you have is that generation versus the millennials and the Generation Zs. That's the new dynamic. I don't think it's black and white. So I don't worry about race wars. In all honesty, I wouldn't have worried about it in the 60s or the 70s just as a numerical number. But leaving that aside, I'm not worrying about that now. What I am worried about is this. Our politics is polarized and there's no saving it. And what it is, we have to just go through this stage until the Generation Zs and the millennials elect themselves in, stay there long enough, and become the dominant political apparatus. And then certain things are going to shift because another generation is going to die off or leave off, right? I think that is where this country is going. But I was at one time I lamented, and now I'm at peace with it. I think our politics is permanently polarized, and the current Republican base, they have maybe 2 presidencies left, maybe 3 where they're a power to deal with. And then they're just going to be outpopulated. And they know that because the people running the actuarial tables said 10 years ago that they're going to be outpopulated. And that's one of the reasons they've been kind of tilting more to the right, trying to drill certain things into the ground, like voting rights and changing statutes, right? But they only have maybe 2 or 3 presidencies left before they're just simply outpopulated and spent out. And then things will readjust.
Could I ask, do you think they have 2 or 3 presidencies left, even with the possible passing of voter reform or any changes in that?
Here's the thing with voter reform. Words matter. In politics, words matter. I would not classify what Georgia did as Jim Crow when you look at what Jim Crow was.
Right.
Okay. Now I understand political rhetoric and I understand what's the game is being played, but we're having an intelligent discussion. So what happened in Georgia is not Jim Crow. Here's the thing. You could go, because the mayor of Atlanta did what I would expect a mayor of her generation and her education and quality would do. All right. First, she read the thing. And then she said, fine, we will, over the next 2 years, make sure everybody has a voter ID. We will just set policy and get people to go all over the place and make sure. Because remember, if you have a voter ID, half of what the Georgia Republicans wanted to do now goes down the drain because you just simply copy the thing and put it in the form and put it in the mail. Now they have to count it. Okay. If you look at the statute says that poll workers and election workers can't do the water and everything else. Anybody else can. Okay. So just get the anybody else that's not attached to any of the 2 candidates. And now you've washed the impact of the first part of that statute right out. It's who hands you the water. It's not that it can't be handed to you, right? If you read the bill. All right, then. So you make adjustments. I'm not saying that thing is not unconstitutional by purpose, but I don't know if you're going to get a court say that in time. But you can do what the statute says and get to your point where everybody votes. You just have to make adjustments and make sure everybody has the ID. So it can be dealt with. Nobody's going to write a statute that says blacks can't vote. Okay, we have federal law, we have Supreme Court. That's just not going to happen. Okay, but they can be a royal pain in the neck, and that's what they want to do, because here's what they're banking on. November was a fluke. Everybody came out and voted. We don't have 80 million and 74 million people voting for president. That was a fluke. Everybody came out because everybody thought that their lives were on the line. Okay, 2 years from now, 4 years from now, it's going to be whose side comes out with that level of passion. And generally, progressives and blacks and youth don't come out with the passion they came out with in November. So anything that makes things more difficult to vote, people don't. And that's usually on our side, not theirs. So that's what they're banking on. They're banking on that we're not going to be that angry and that impassioned 2 and 4 years from now. So they passed this law to get another cut on the people who are not interested in 2 and 4 years. Because the reason Georgia is because everybody and their mother came out of the ground and voted. If you look at voting numbers, November is not the norm. And that's what their side is banking on, because their side will come out 2 and 4 years from now. The white evangelical Christians and white social conservative Christians They will come out in mass. The question is, will we come out in mass? Because if we don't, we will lose the House in 2 years, is what the Republicans are banking on. And with a 50-50 margin in the Senate, all you need is one state not to come out. And Biden now has a Republican House and Senate, and nothing's going to happen. That's why he's ramming everything through the first year, because he knows in 2 years he could be stymied. And he's also took a lesson from the Obama administration. His lesson that he learned is you cannot argue with these Republicans for 8 months over a policy. They're not coming with you no matter what happens. So give them a month and then ram it right down everybody's throat. That's the lesson that Biden learned, and the Obama people that came back with Biden, that's what they learned. And Biden has said as much. He said the problem with Obama was that he was humble in his victories. And so the people didn't know what he did was good. And it was true. Obama bragged about himself, I think, only 3 times in 8 years. It took Obama 6 years to make peace that the Republicans were not going to do anything with him. And then he just executive ordered everything for the last 2 years. Okay, Biden learned the lesson. The Republicans cannot be spoken to. We'll give them a shot, and then we're going to ram it and then take our chances in the midterms. And that's what Biden is, how Biden's approach is. And since the Senate parliamentarian has said now his 2 big legislative goals are free from filibuster, all he needs to do is keep the mansions of the Democratic Party in line, and he'll get what he wants, and then he'll take his chances in the midterms. But at least he'll have done what he wanted to get done. Now, his problem is that Democrats always have the mansions in their midst. And with a 50-50 Senate, one mansion jams up everything. And so now Biden's got to go around and kind of stroke and get the mansions of the party in line, because now they matter.
You don't want them to flip.
Right.
If they flip, it's over.
Right. Because once it flips, then everything's academic. Then everything freezes.
I love how you got into explaining Trumpism, and it was just so deep. It's like, this is the answer to everything. If people, and I guess that's my biggest concern. You have so many truths, and we have I guess it's a war against the truth that's going on. Truths like this need to be in the educational system. They need to be with teachers so they can impart that knowledge. They need to be with policemen so that when they are policing, they don't get, you gave it a name, I forgot. It was just so deep. My mind was just everywhere, but you gave it a name for where they go in with these preconceived notions before they even know the incident. It's the fact that you're Black. So
implicit bias.
Yes, implicit bias. So how do we get information like this into police training, into elected officials, into the school system, into, and incidentally, I meant to say, I plan to write an Amazon review. It'll be under the name of Dr. D when you see it. Okay.
Oh,
but
thank you. Thank you, because I don't have any. So please, thank you.
Okay. But how do we make truth relevant again? And also, and then this is my last thing, I'm gonna be quiet so other people can talk. Also, I want your input on something like what Marilyn Mosby's done, where she's decided not to prosecute the low-level crimes because she found out that by not prosecuting them, crime still went down to everyone's surprise. And hopefully this can be something that others emulate. Or is that just wishing for too much?
Well, one of the things is that a lot of cities rubbing white social conservatives, and when I talk about white social conservatives, I don't mean individuals, I mean a worldview, right? And when we talk about rhetoric and narrative together, that's worldview. So when I'm talking about white social conservatives, talking about the worldview that they have, not any particular person or a white and conservative separated together. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a way of seeing the world, because you can have a lot of Blacks that have a white social conservative worldview, right? That's a whole other conversation. All right, now, so Mosby, she's saying, okay, we aren't, because what she's trying to get to is this: the history of Black incarceration, modern version. So starting in the 80s with Reagan, right? Modern version was low-level crack possession, low-level marijuana possession, and absolute incarceration. So a lot of Blacks got themselves incarcerated on relatively low crimes, not murders, rapes, kidnappings, and things that you really build prisons for, right? Low-level drug crimes. Now, the problem with the Black community as opposed to white community and drugs is this: whites and Blacks use drugs about the same. The difference is not significant enough to explain the policy outcome. Okay. But what the problem is, though, is that Blacks, for various reasons, like we talked about earlier, their crime was in the street and public, in the urban areas where the news media only need to drive for half an hour to go see it. Whites were in the suburbs and rural areas, and they did it behind closed doors. So Black crime was there for everybody to see. And so Black crime became the face of crime. So what Mosby is trying to get to is, okay, the small crimes, we need to stop prosecuting these small crimes and filling prisons with these small offenders. Now, the murderers, rapists, and thieves, the kidnappers, okay, yeah, we build prisons for them and we can put them under the prison. And liberal prosecutors got no problem with that. But they want to go after these small crimes that suck in mostly Blacks and Hispanics. And that's the theory that Mosley is trying to apply. I have not looked at their crime rate, so I don't know if it's actually really going up or down.
Yeah, she said violent crimes in Baltimore is down 20%.
Okay.
Which to her credit means that you can actually bring down serious crime without arresting people for low-level crimes.
Oh, absolutely.
Double effect.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. You can. If that is how you are setting up, that's also what the district attorney here in Philadelphia is trying to do. And the conservatives in Philadelphia are totally freaking out and trying to get him defeated in the next election. Here's a thing to understand about prosecuting. The criminal justice system is one of the few systems where you can know just about nothing and have a fully formed opinion. Right? Let's put it this way. A brain surgeon says you cut here, not there. Right? Whatever, right? A heart surgeon says you cut here, not there. An eye surgeon says you do this, not that. Okay. All right. I look at a brain surgery, I look at an eye surgery, I look at a heart surgery. I am in no position to say this doctor is wrong. I'm in no position to say this doctor is right. I'm in no position to say this medicine or that medicine should be used in this quantity or that quantity. Right? Criminal justice, I could not tell the difference between a cop and the back end of an aircraft carrier. And I can have a fully functioning opinion on how criminal justice should be. Criminal justice is that kind of thing. Because in the end, criminal justice boils down to your definition of right and wrong and your concept of vengeance. And because of that, you can know nothing and have an opinion. And that's why criminal justice is so hot the way it is. There was a time the only Senate committee which you knew was partisan was the Judiciary Committee. Everybody else was the two parties found a way to get along. Judiciary Committee was always hostile. Why? Because the Judiciary Committee deals with law and judges and judges saying this, not that. And in the end, that comes down to your concept of right and wrong. You don't need to have education to have a concept of right and wrong. That's why criminal justice system is always so hot and argumentative. And in the end, if you talk to somebody about criminal justice system and what they think is right and wrong, if you listen, you can hear their whole moral concept of the world. Because their whole concept moral of the world defines how they see criminal justice. If you're watching a surgery, your concept of right and wrong has nothing to do with it.
Okay. Thank you.
I
Any
have,
other questions? Yes,
yeah,
please.
I do have a question for you. You talked about how the concentration in a neighborhood, how it got there, and um, so we've got the Black neighborhoods. We've got a concentration of crime in the Black neighborhoods. We've got the thought that going to jail is not a bad thing. What do we do about that? I mean, a lot of our people are in the neighborhoods, and their actions or inactions to me determine what the Black community is, how we're going to move or not move as a community. So what can be done
I
to make
will. To swing off what the doctor said. Being an educator, okay, my first answer is, of course, education. People need to learn how this got this way. And then we have to actually have an internal conversation and admit that we have some fools running around here. And we have to have an internal conversation about we are better than this, and this is why, and this is how. Because if people do better when they know better. Now, here's the problem. Now, middle class and educated Blacks, this is what they don't want to hear. Before the 1968 Civil Rights Act, because you were Black, you lived there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Because you were Black, you lived there. So you could be educated or stupid. You could be the priest or the pimp. You live there. All right, then. Now, here's the problem. Then the priests, the doctors, the lawyers, the bus drivers, the cops outnumbered the pimps and the drug dealers. So the kids coming up saw what was authentically Black, and the criminals were outliers. Okay, that's what we had. Now, now Moynihan gets into this, right? The Moynihan report. Moynihan points this out. He points out that middle-class, educated working Blacks are stuck because of Jim Crow. All right, then. Okay, so 68 comes around, the Civil Rights Act kicks in, and this piece of legislation works. Okay, then, by 73, 74, who's running? Whites aren't running. Educated Blacks are running. And guess what runs after them? The Black church. So let's back up a second. Sutherland tells us in social disorganization theory that if you have these four informal institutions of social control, crime drops and is small, right? Church, family, school, employment. Those four. Church, family, school, employment. When those are properly aligned, those are the informal institutions of social control. They translate from one generation to another, moral concepts, right and wrong, hard work, so on and so on and so forth. All right. Sutherland says, when those four collapse, the three formal institutions of social control show up: cops, courts, corrections. So this is what happened when middle-class Black flight ran, taking the Black church with it, both of them chasing white flight, all of them chasing middle-class factory jobs that went to the suburbs. When all of them left, guess what? All four institutions of informal social control disappeared, which left those that couldn't run. And now the pimps and the crooks were the majority. Now the kids growing up, when they see success, that's a pimp, not a doctor. Now that concentrated for generations. And now here we are where we are, right? That's where Cornel West says, right, in the 50s, we had great neighborhoods. In the 70s, we came out of the 70s, we didn't have so much neighborhoods as we had hoods, right? And so now here we are. Okay. So we have to admit how that story happened. All right. Getting to how it solves, I think it's intergenerational. The best of us in our own way have to reach other people in neighborhoods, in schools, in churches, and educate them about this history and show them we're still here.
Mhm.
Black people are a strong people. 1619?
Yes.
I mean, hold it. Let me give you just a couple of numbers just to think about numbers. 1619 to 1865. How long is that? Okay, being a social scientist, I took a calculator and looked, right? 246 years. That's how long slavery was. 1789 to 1865. Under the Constitution, the first 76 years was slavery. 1877 to 1968. 91 years, that's Jim Crow. So after 246 years, discounting 10 years of Reconstruction, Black people suffered 91 years of Jim Crow, which by statute, Blacks were second-class citizens. 1877 to 1945, 68 years. This is when America went from a third-rate country that had a civil war, half the country is in rubble, to when the United States ran the world as a superpower, those 68 years. Now, in the book, I talk about this because the reason that this is important, those 68 years, why we also have to put that in context, that is also the golden era of Jim Crow, and is also the era of when the United States grew from third rate to first rate. America became America, while making Blacks second-class citizens. America's growth into what she is, African Americans were fundamentally, by statute, excluded from. There is where, when we want to talk about systemic racism, that's where the story is, right? 2021 is different than 1921, right? Okay. 1921, people were getting lynched, literally. And we had to convince people that there was something wrong with that. Today, Chauvin acts the fool and everybody freaks, leaving aside what we do in trial. But as in the world of court of public opinion, everybody is up in arms. 1921, it wasn't so. So it's not like the United States hasn't changed. But I think the way that we make things better is I think we all in our place educate people. Organizations that work with our youth, we try and get them into college or something else. I'm a firm believer that college is not the only answer, but I think in high schools we should tell every child you have a right to think about college. Too many people are telling them that college is beyond you in 2021, which is an abomination. No. Every child should think about it. Now, if you decide you want your life differently, you want to decide to go learn how to code and spend 6 months learning how to code, and then somebody hires you for $120,000 to write code, I'm good with you. But every child, it should be put on their radar screen that they can go to college, get educated, learn things. As far as getting information out, I love doing stuff like this. I am not proud. If anybody would like to have me back on something else or recommend me for something else, and I talk to another group, I guarantee you the honor will be totally mine. I put things on YouTube. There's a wonderful invention. You'd be surprised at things you could find on YouTube. You'd be surprised at things you can learn going on YouTube. All you need is a computer and internet. You'd be surprised how many ways you can clean out ignorance. Everything's on that thing. It's a wonderful invention.
That's the number one search engine for young people. We Google and all that, but they go right to YouTube for everything.
And then you find everything. You find all sorts of things on YouTube. So I think education is there. We have to encourage people to get it. And I think Generation Z and the millennials are on a whole other wavelength. And I think some things will get better simply as they move up into things. I mean, I love AOC. Sometimes she could be a little intemperate, but I love AOC. And, I think give her a couple of years and I think she's going to be a little more focused. you know, and she's going to be a wonderful congresswoman and hopefully a senator somewhere. But her generation going into Congress, I think, is another one of the ways that you know, we will do things. And also because of Floyd, we're having conversations we weren't having before. We're having conversations we weren't having before, and that's also another way of making things better. So overall, I'm still hopeful. I think our politics is polarized, going to stay that way, because I think we have to get through that to get to the other side. I think on the other side, things are better, but I think we have to go through polarization. I mean, when wearing a mask is a political thing, what can I tell you? Okay. Any other questions?
I just want to add that the reason we got the polarization is because people won't face the truth. That's what I stated at the beginning. If people face the truth, whether it's with what's happened to Blacks, whether it's what happened, the only reason they saw George Floyd, I saw a Black man get choked by a policeman in 2016 with Eric Garner. But a lot of people didn't see it because, you know, and this COVID did a lot of things, but one of the good things it did is it forced people to be at home, and they got to see George Floyd for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, and they got to see it over and over because they weren't doing other stuff that they were doing when Eric Garner got sucker jumped from the back and choked. And so the problem I see with the polarization is the fact that in order to even have a decent conversation about anything, we have to start with the truth. And we have people now that refuse to start with the truth or acknowledge the truth.
And I agree with you, Cynthia. And, you know, truth for one person is not truth for another person. You know, what I feel like we live in two parallel universes sometimes, you know, and kind of going back to what Mr. Garrison said, you look at Fox News, that's another universe. That's a whole nother universe. What they're talking about, you know, how they perceive what's going on in this country and the rest of the world is totally different from what's going on or said or perceived or what the truth is coming from different other, you know, medias. So I don't know what the answer is to that, but that's you know, where this polarization is coming from. And you know, truth, they have their truth, the other side has their truth. We're in two different universes.
But some truth is just true. Some truth is not their truth, our truth. Some truth. Blacks were brought over here in 1619. That's the truth. A year before that, some Africans came. A year before the Mayflower, some Africans came over here. That's the truth.
That's a fact.
See?
That's a fact.
That's what I mean by the truth. I mean the facts.
And the truth are not necessarily the same things.
But I'm using them synonymous. That's
a fact. But that, you know, when you talk about, because truth goes more into principle and what you believe and what you don't believe, as opposed to just a fact. And you know, we have right now two parallel universes operating in this thing called the United States of America. You know, because when that riot, the stampede of the Capitol in January, you know, that was so beyond anything I could have conceived in the universe that I live in. But those people, they were ready for that.
Remember, we were watching it. We were on our book club because we were freaking out over it. I was like, is this real time? Because I thought it was something. They was walking, strolling through like they were at home. And I was like, what is going on? Remember,
and they were operating off of their truth. They were operating off of their truth. We live in two different universes.
Yes, totally different. And the thing with the education, and you hit the nail right on the head. There's a difference between facts and truth, because truth also depends on meaning. Facts are facts, right? 1619, they came from Angola on a ship. Okay, they landed in Virginia. Okay, that's a raw fact. Okay, what does that mean? Does it mean anything? Well, that's rhetoric, narrative, worldview. That governs who you vote for in politics. Who wins makes policy. And if you have somebody making policy that's saying 1619 is Yeah, okay. Versus somebody who's making policy says that means something in 246 years. Well, you get two different policy outputs and two different policy outcomes. That's why elections matter. Now, and in defense of American politics, here's the hard part people don't want to hear. Our political system is not broken. It's working the way it's designed. The
Yeah.
majority wins. And the majority that wins makes policy A instead of policy B. And then you have an election 2, 4, and 6 years. It's not broken. What's broken is the narratives that win or the narratives that lose, depending on what side you're on, and what we decide is and is not what government is for, and that's worldview. But as far as our political system works, January 6th notwithstanding, that was an aberration. But generally, you win, you govern, you lose, you cry, you win, you laugh again. Your policy prevails, your policy doesn't prevail. The court says yes, the court says no. The system, the machine is not the problem. The problem is what is being fed into the machine and what comes out of the machine. But the machine does what the machine does, right? We should spend less time saying our system is broken and spend more time talking about what's broken is what we put into the machine.
Right. Okay. Any other questions, Betty?
I just have an observation. First of all, I thoroughly appreciate Dr. Garrison's chronology, because oftentimes we think of these things as isolated incidents that just happened. But as you have so brilliantly pointed out, it's a process here. And you have to understand the process to see where we are now. The other observation that you made that I thoroughly agree with is that the old guard is just going to have to die out. We cannot change how these people are thinking, but there is hope, which you have so brilliantly pointed out, that the millennials and Generation Z, they're going to make the difference. And I just hope that I'm around long enough to see the changes that they're going to make, because it's going to come, but it's just going to take time.
Okay. Roberta?
No, I agree. And thank you very much. It's been very enlightening and, shedding some light in what has been a very dark period and, just holding out hope. I too, like Betty, would like to think that I'll be around to see the changes. I just know that it's been so long coming. And I'm just anxious for change, like when President Obama was elected, I believe that, we can, see a difference, but it's just so hard to live through it and not see it right now.
Well, that is one of the things that I try to do in the book, is because it's hard to see change if you measure everything by your particular place thereof. Right? Because what our parents did and our grandparents did, we can't say it hasn't changed. I mean, Obama used to say that a lot. One of the things that bother me about Obama is that if you read his speeches, the people that detract him have never read any of them. Because if you read his speeches when he talks about race and he's talking to Black people, a theme that is in that speech, every speech, is today is much better than it was in the 50s and the 30s and the 40s. And it is unfair and not right to say that nothing has changed. Things have gotten better. Now, we have not reached perfection, granted, but great things have happened. Opportunities are all over the place. The opportunities that we have, our parents didn't. And the opportunities we have, our grandparents never even thought about. And we need to take advantage of those and let the generation coming up behind us in on that. Because a lot of people are telling them that nothing has changed because they have no sense of history. They have no sense of political history, social history, political science, right? That's one I tell my students, you need to take these courses because as criminal justice professionals, the criminal justice system makes no sense if you have no sense of politics and history. It makes no sense. America is much better than she was. The problem is that she still has somewhere to go. And what it is everything is now subliminal. Because if you can put your knee on a Black man's neck while he is crying out for his mother before he dies, and you have that look on your face, that's what I'm waiting for the prosecutor to point out to the jury. Look at his face and his body language. He's not freaking out that a crowd is about to jump in or Floyd is going to get up. There's some enjoyment going on in there.
Yes.
Okay. The underlying racism is the fact that he could enjoy it and think he'd get away with it. He's doing this in front of a camera. It's not like he's in some back alley somewhere, right? He's doing that in front of a camera and at least 6 people who are all yelling at him. And he's doing that at least in front of the one girl's camera. He knows all of the police officers' body cameras are going. It's not like he's in a back alley somewhere and he figures he's not going to get caught. So my question is, what is subliminally in your head that you don't have a problem with this? Now, that subliminal is what America has to deal with now. Our parents and our grandparents had to deal with straight, good old-fashioned run-of-the-mill racism, Jim Crow, and Klansmen walking down Pennsylvania Avenue. That's what our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents had to deal with. We have to deal with a more subtle problem. And also people, not being truthful. Last point, I'm gonna let you go. One of the things that the doctor said about truth is this. Here's a pet peeve of mine. People talk about Dr. King and they want to talk about the last 10 minutes of a 45-minute speech.
Yes.
I can't. I'm not even gonna enunciate on that. But I'm just saying that is a pet peeve of mine. And then even worse, his entire career from 55 to 68, and they boil it down to, "I have a dream." Really? First, that wasn't even part of the speech. But leaving that story aside,
Right.
he said so much more in depth about everything. And you Santa Claus him down to, "I have a dream."
Yeah.
See, that's the problem we have to deal with in our kids coming up. Because people look at King as soft and weak because that's all we tell them. It takes backbone to walk into Bull Connor's house and stand there and take a beating. Okay? I'm with Malcolm, don't get me wrong, but Malcolm would shoot somebody. Okay? Malcolm is not taking a beating over a principle. Okay? But Martin took a beating, right? Right. Congressman, the congressman took a beating for a principle. All right, I tell you what, I'm not of that class. Okay. Okay. We gonna fight. Okay. I'm not of that. That's why, when
Must be related to Joyce.
you understand? Right. King, right? That kind of mindset, I bow my head because I'm not at that level. But because of them, we are where we are.
Yes.
It's no answer to say that things haven't gotten better. Things are getting better. Things are changing. But the problem is the kids coming up are not given a historical context of anything.
Right.
And America generally has no historical context about anything. Most people couldn't put American history inside of Western history and see how Western history made us and what we gave to Western history. People could not do that with American history. And America is only 240 something years old, right? That by itself is an issue. America is still a very young country as countries go in the West or on the face of the earth. America is still a very young country. But leaving that aside, Western tradition gives a lot to the United States. The United States has given something back to Western tradition, and people have no idea what that is and what that means, and why things like Chauvin is a disgrace on multiple levels, because they have no sense of context. All they see is, yeah, this cop acted the fool, and that's how they want to have the conversation. No, this cop is a 20-year veteran. This cop didn't wake up one morning and say, okay, today I'm going to do something that's going to wreck my career and put me in prison. That's not how it works. A police officer who abuses a Black man's rights, he doesn't wake up one morning and say he's going to do that, especially a 20-year veteran. There was something in his head, in that police department, in the culture he was in, and he thought he could get away with it. And today he just went too far. Right? Yeah. And that's the kind of conversation that we need to have, but you have to have a sense of history and not lying about it. Okay. And now this is where, you know, I'm kind of euphoric, because that's not how things work. But that's how things should work for us to get to the problem.
Well,
and I know we're running out of time, but something that came to me, if you could just speak very briefly about all those children, the immigrants, thousands of immigrant children that are coming into this country. I believe that this is going to have a major impact on us as a country, one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. Oh, one way or the other. Absolutely.
One way or the other. Thousands of young people just being, what is to become of these? I mean,
it's got to stop too.
You know, here's the one thing. I'll just leave this really little info snippet. White social conservative worldview for the last 5 years, 6 years, have been raising Cain about MS-13, right? That gang that, you know, they rob, kill, and rape just to put people in line. All right, then. All right, I'm good with you. And they're down in South America, turning countries upside down. And one of the reasons people are running to the United States is to get away with the MS-13s. And the MS-13s, and they're worried about MS-13 people trying to come into the United States. All right, fine. Let's take that narrative as given. Here's what people don't know. MS-13 is an American creation. It came out of California prisons. People in prison in California, they formed MS-13 to fight Black gangs and white gangs. What we took is those people that were in those prisons, that gang in California, we deported them to South America. They set up shop and went buck wild, and now they came back. It's an American export, MS-13. And white social conservatives are telling us that these mongrels are, you know, just the threat to society all over the place. Yeah. And guess who created them? And guess who exported them? But nobody wants to talk about that. Ladies, the honor was mine, of course. Thank you very much. And please, if you want to have me back and we talk about other things, the honor, of course, is all mine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been